All right, let's just jump right in. I want you to look around you right now. Find the most normal, everyday object you can see. Could be your desk, a coffee mug, maybe even the chair you're sitting on. Feels pretty solid, doesn't it? Pretty real. Well, what if I told you there's a world-class philosopher who argues that your chair doesn't actually exist?
And no, this isn't some kind of trick question or a riddle. It's a serious philosophical puzzle that cuts to the very core of what we even mean when we say something is real. It's a question that challenges our most basic, gut-level assumptions about the world. The man behind this mind-bending idea is Peter van Inwagen, who is an absolute giant in modern metaphysics. And he's not just trying to be provocative. He's built an entire logically consistent system that leads to some really wild conclusions. And to see how he makes your chair just vanish into thin air, we have to start with his first, most important rule. See, before we can even start to argue about what exists, we first need to agree on what the word exists even means. And for Van Inwagen, there is absolutely no wiggle room here. This is the foundation for everything he says. It's called the univocal theory of being. And what it means is that existence is like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. Something exists or it doesn't. There aren't different kinds or levels of existing. It's all or nothing. To back this up, he throws out this really clever challenge. He says, look, if you think there are things that kind of sort of are but don't really exist, fine, just show me one. Go ahead, try to name something that doesn't exist. He's totally confident his system can handle any example you throw at him. So let's take a classic example, right? The sentence, purple cows don't exist. Old ways of thinking got really tangled up here, saying that for the sentence to even make sense, you had to imagine some kind of non-existent purple cow to talk about. Van Inwagen just slices right through that knot. He says, no, you're looking at it all wrong. The sentence isn't about some weird ghostly cow. It's a statement about all the real things in the universe. And it's just saying that if you look at every single existing thing, not one of them has the property of being purple and the property of being a cow. Easy. Problem solved. Okay, fine. But here's the big one, right? Mickey Mouse. We all know who he is. We talk about him. But he's a cartoon. He can't exist in the same way you and I do. So how on earth does Van Inwagen's super strict, one-meaning-only system deal with that? And this is where he hits you with the plot twist. He says, Mickey Mouse does exist. I mean, you can literally sue someone for infringing on the Mickey Mouse copyright. He exists, just not as a physical talking mouse. He exists as an abstract object, kind of like the number 7 or the concept of justice. He's a creation of human minds that has very real effects in the world. Now, to make this all work logically, he introduces this really clever distinction between having a property and holding a property. So a fictional character like Suki Rougemont from a novel has properties in the real world. For example, she has the property of being created by the author John Updike. That's a real fact about an abstract object. But she only holds properties inside her story. She holds the property of being a witch. This little trick lets us say true things about fiction without ever breaking that first rule of existence. It's a really tight, consistent system. So now that we see how the rules work, let's apply them to the world around us. And this, my friends, is where things get truly wild. We are about to take that same cold, hard logic about existence and point it directly at things like tables, mountains, and yes, your chair. And, spoiler alert, most of them are not going to make it. This whole thing hinges on what philosophers call the special composition question. It sounds pretty simple, right? When do a bunch of little things, like atoms or Legos or planks of wood, stop being just a pile of stuff and actually become one new thing, like a spaceship or a house? We need a consistent rule for this. Van Inwagen just goes through and demolishes all the obvious answers. You think the rule is that parts have to be touching? Nope. When you shake my hand, we don't suddenly become a new combined object. Okay, what if they're stuck together, glued or nailed? Nope, gluing our hands together doesn't work either. Well, what about the extreme views? There's universalism, which says any collection of things forms an object, but that leads to insane results, like an object made of your left shoe in the planet Jupiter. Then there's nihilism, which says nothing ever combines to form a new object. But that can't be right either because you exist and you're made of parts. So all the easy answers are off the table. After he's ruled everything else out, this is the only answer left standing. The only time he argues that a bunch of little things truly come together to make one single new thing is when all their activities working together create a life. And the result of that single rule is just
Shocking. Look at this. According to his logic, you, a tree, a cat, any living organism, you are real unified objects. But your chair, a mountain, a car? Nope. They don't exist as single objects. They are just vast collections of tiny particles or simples that are arranged chair-wise or mountain-wise. The chair as a whole thing doesn't exist. Only the zillions of particles that happen to be in that shape do. So he's completely redrawn the map of everything that physically exists. But his rigorous thinking doesn't stop there. He takes that same logical power and aims it at one of the biggest questions we can ask about ourselves. Are any of our choices actually free?
As Van Inwagen sees it, free will is basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you have determinism. If every single thing that happens today is just the unavoidable outcome of the Big Bang plus the laws of physics, then how could you have chosen to do anything different? But on the other side, you have indeterminism. And if your actions are just totally random, uncaused quantum events firing in your brain, then how are they your choices? They're not chosen, they just happened.
His argument against free will in a deterministic world is legendary. It's called the consequence argument, and it's basically a logical trap. If determinism is true, your actions today are the direct consequence of the way the world was 1,000,000 years ago, plus the laws of nature. You can't change the past, and you can't change the laws of nature. Therefore, you can't change your actions. No free will. Now, some modern critics, like the philosopher Christian List, have pushed back pretty hard on this. They claim that Van Inwagen's whole argument makes a fundamental error, what they call a category mistake. The basic idea is that there are two different ways of talking about the world that we shouldn't mix. There's the agential level, the language of choices, beliefs, reasons, and then there's the physical level, the language of atoms, forces, and laws of nature. The critics say you can't take a concept from the physical level, like the laws of nature, and mix it up with a concept from the agential level, like having the power to choose. They say it's like asking what the color of jealousy is. The concepts don't belong together. But Van Inwagen's response to this is just devastating. He basically says, yeah, I know. Mixing those levels isn't a flaw in my argument. It's the entire point of the problem. The whole deep, difficult question of free will is about how a person who makes choices can possibly exist inside a physical universe governed by laws. To say we can't talk about them together is to just ignore the problem, not solve it. So where does that leave him? Well, it leaves him in a really fascinating and incredibly honest position. He believes absolutely that we have moral responsibility, that things can be right or wrong, and for that to be true, we have to have free will. And yet, his own airtight arguments seem to prove that free will is logically impossible in either a deterministic or an indeterministic universe. So he arrives at his famous conclusion. It's not him giving up, it's a precise philosophical stance. Free will is something real that we are rationally required to believe in, but how it works is a profound mystery that our current understanding of the world cannot explain. Okay, so after all that, chairs aren't real and free will is an unsolvable mystery. You're probably sitting there thinking, why? Why go through all this intellectual gymnastics just to end up in such a weird place? And that's a fair question. Because the whole point isn't necessarily the weird destination, it's the journey. It's about a commitment to what you might call uncomfortable realism. It's about a kind of intellectual courage, the willingness to follow a logical argument all the way to its conclusion, no matter how much it messes with your common sense. And that's really the value of thinking through these ideas. Van Inwagen forces us to admit that the big questions, what is real, what am I free, are genuinely hard. He shows us that easy, common-sense answers often fall apart under pressure. And sometimes, the most rigorous logic doesn't lead to a simple answer, but instead reveals the true depth of a mystery, showing us the absolute edge of what we can understand. And that's the real thought to walk away with. His philosophy is this powerful challenge. If our most basic, rock-solid intuition about something as simple and real as a chair can completely dissolve under logical scrutiny, well, what other assumptions are we making about the world and about ourselves that might be worth questioning?